So in this video we're going to have a look at setTimeout. We're going to have a little look at how it works and then also finish off the traffic light that we started in the first video. Before we do that though, I'll just say what it's for. So setTimeout creates a delay before something happens, and that can be useful when timing things. So watch the previous video if you're not sure whether you need setTimeout, setInterval or request animation frame. This page uses it in two different ways. So it uses a delay for the next row to appear, and the reason I use setTimeout rather than setInterval is the game speeds up, so the interval actually changes. The other reason I've used it on this page is to create a little delay after the answer is entered. So the bottom row, the answer is 3, 2 and 1. If when I originally created this, as soon as you press 3, that row disappeared, and that looked a bit strange. So similarly here, if I press 2, there's a little bit of a delay before the row disappears. And similarly here, if I click that digit to make 1, there'll be a short delay before it disappears. So you can use setTimeout for that, or to get things to appear. You need to be a little bit careful if you want things to appear precisely, because although you can set the delay before the next thing happens, if you use it at the end of a function, and we'll come back to this in a minute, the amount of delay will be the time it takes to run the function plus the delay. So if you want things to appear precisely, so if you're creating a clock or a timer or something like that, you probably want setInterval, which will be in the next video. So I've made a simple page to demonstrate this process first of all, and here it is. So we've got a heading 1, and we just the heading in. We've got a paragraph with some text in, and it's got an ID of text, so we can refer to it later. We'll see that in a minute. And then it's got an input button, which currently doesn't do anything. So we can get a button to do things with the onClick event. So we can get it to pop up a message. But what about if we want to have a delay? So the setTimeout syntax is like this. So it's setTimeout, and then what we have is what we want it to do. So I'll just actually shrink that back down again. What we want it to do, which is in this case alert. So if we get it to pop up a message after a second, so alert hello, and then the delay. So the delay is in milliseconds, so 1,000 milliseconds will mean get it to happen in a second's time. And the reason that's not appeared correctly is because I've put speech marks inside my string, so I'll just swap those for apostrophes. Okay, so if I run this now, so I save that and I'll refresh my page. When I click my button, it does say hello, but there isn't a delay. And the reason for that is that the what you put in here needs to be a function. So you can use the name of a function. I've got one in here ready to go. But before we do that, so if you want to do something simple, you can put it in here. You just need to make sure that you put function, open and close brackets, and then put what you want to do in curly brackets. So I'm going to say hello after a second. So hopefully if I save that and refresh, I'll click the button and then a second later it says hello. That's okay if you want to do one thing, but if you've got several things to do, that can get quite long and messy and a bit unreadable in line. So it's probably better to create your own function to do what it is you want to do. So I'll call it example here. Does what it says on the tin. So onClick equals set. I've deleted a bit too much there, haven't I? setTimeout. So notice the capital T as well. setTimeout. And I'm going to run change after 1,000 milliseconds. So that's after a second. And what example does, so it's not change, is it? It's example. Getting confused with my last video. So I'm going to run example after 1,000 milliseconds. And what example does is it refers to the paragraph by its ID and it just changes the text. So let's go and have a look at that page now. So I'll refresh that page. So I'm going to click the button, click, and then after a second it changes the text. So that's basically how it works. It introduces that delay before something happens. So how are we going to use that to finish off our traffic light? Well, if we go back to the traffic light code, this is as we left it. So one thing is it's a bit big, isn't it? So I'm just going to reduce the size of the lights a little bit so it all fits on the page. So I'm going to go 25, 25, maybe 35. So that's shrunk it down. Let's see what it looks like in the browser. Yep, that's better, isn't it? So the other thing is, because I'm going to change the lights using JavaScript, they're currently coloured using IDs. So if you look back at the first video, we used a class of lamp for the things they have in common, so the size, the rounding, etc. And then we use ID for where they differ, in this case the colours. But because we're going to use JavaScript to set the colours, actually we don't need that anymore. Okay, so I've deleted those and we're going to use some JavaScript. So again, I've already inserted my script tags here. We'll need a few things to get us going. So we'll have a sequence and there'll be a number of steps in the sequence. So I'm going to have a variable to record where we are in the sequence, and I'll start at 0 because I'm going to use some arrays, and arrays are going to be 0 based. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an array to indicate which lights should be turned on at each point in the sequence. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a kind of binary flag system. So the red I'm going to give a value of 1 to, and the amber I'm going to give a value of 2, and green I'm going to give a value of 4. So rather than numbering them 1, 2, 3, I'm numbering them 1, 2, 4 using the binary column headings. And the reason I've done that is, so if you've seen this page on my website, I'll put a link in the description if you want to give it a go. I've done it with kind of curriculum subjects here. So if science was 3, I wouldn't be able to add together the numbers to create a unique combination. So at the moment, English and science, that combination, if I add the numbers together, that will be a total of 3. Science is 4. So 3 can only represent the combination of English and maths. If I'd made science 3, then 3 could represent either science or English and maths. So each number, so if we say 7, for example, 7 can only be the combination of English, maths and science because it's 4, 2 and 1. So that's the idea behind the principle. How do we separate them out again? Well, what we do, we can use a bitwise AND. So again, I'll put a link to this in the description as well. So if you haven't encountered bitwise logic before, basically it's a combination of Boolean logic and binary. So if we have 7 in binary is a 4, a 2 and a 1. So if we use these to represent the red, the amber and the green lights, how do we know when each of the lights is going to be on? Well, what we can do is we can use a bitwise AND. So it's just a Boolean AND, like we do in a truth table, but done a digit at a time in a binary number. So what it does, because the answer to an AND can only be a 1 if both of the inputs are 1, doesn't it? So both of these rows need to be a 1 in any position for the answer at the bottom to be 1. So what we can do is we can use zeros to mask off any digits we're not interested in. So if we do and 1, we can only see what's going on in the last place. So so the bottom row represents the answer. That changes if I change the 1 bit in the top number, but it doesn't change if I change anything else. So I'm using that bitwise AND to mask off the bits I'm not interested in. Similarly, I could do the same thing if I move it over 1, then I can only see what's going on in the second position, and so on. Notice the answer is either 0 or the column heading. So for green light, when I do this, the answer will be 0 or 4. For the amber light, the answer will be 0 or 2. And for the red light, the answer will be 0 or 1. Okay, so that's the basic principle. You don't have to do it this way. If you wanted to have a go at the traffic light yourself, you could use a load of ifs and things, but I'm going to use this way for a more kind of concise program. So what I'm going to do here then is I'm going to have an array which contains the combinations of lights that are going to be on in each stage. So I'm going to use the UK traffic light sequence. So I know some other countries don't have red and amber, and they don't have an amber between green and red either, but this is how it works here. So we start off with red, which is 1, and then it goes red and amber, which will be 1 and 2, which is 3, and then green, and then red on its own, and then that's it, isn't it? Because then we're back to red. So that's the sequence of lights. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to have an array containing how long each of those lights is going to be on for. And I've called it delay because effectively it's the delay before the next light comes on in the sequence. So you might want to have something like this. Well, red and green are always going to be on longer than the amber stage, but the red and green might not be on as long as each other, depending on how many ways there are at the junction and the priority, etc. So in my case, I'm going to have 10 seconds for red, and obviously this is speeded up, but I don't want to leave it like a minute because that'd be a bit of a faff to test. We'll have 2 seconds on the red and amber. We'll have 8 seconds on green, and then 2 seconds on amber, and then back to the start. And then what else do we need? So we'll also need a collection of the lamps that we're going to refer to. So we'll have a look at how we sort that out in a minute. And in fact we'll do that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this to I don't need to read the state of the lamps into an array every time they change. I can just do it once at the start. So I'm going to say onLoad equals, and then I'm going to call it something like startup. So my startup function is going to read that. So function startup doesn't take any arguments, and what it's going to do is it's going to put bulb. It's going to take bulb, and it's going to read into that document.get elements by class name. So if you're not familiar with that, have a look at the earlier video on collections and for loops. So I'm going to collect all the things called lamp, or with a class of lamp, into a collection called bulb. And the reason I've declared it up here but defined it here inside the function is that scope applies to JavaScript as well. So if I'd have declared it in here, it would have been a local variable to the startup function, and I wouldn't have been able to use it elsewhere. Now, I know a lot of people don't like global variables, but with a lot of web pages, there's not much code at all. So I don't think in a situation like this, using a global variable is a problem. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run my change function. So I'm going to have a second function which does the actual changing. So I'm going to say function change, and I'm going to in here, I'm going to actually move through the sequence. So what does my sequence need to do? Is actually, so it needs to loop through all the items in the bulb collection. So I'm going to say for n, or var n, because I haven't used it yet. Var n is 0. So n can be 0, 1 or 2 because there's 3 bulbs. So I'm going to say n is less than 3. And then I'm going to increment it 1 at a time. And then what am I going to do? So for each of the bulbs, I'm going to set it to the appropriate color. So what is the appropriate color? Well, actually, we could probably do with an array of those as well. So I'm going to say var color. And I'm going to make it like a 2D array. And it's going to have, so it's going to have 3 sub arrays. So it's 1 for each light. So it'd be 0, 1 and 2 for red, amber and green. But also within there it's going to have 2 different colors, the off color and the on color. So red, so I'm going to make it, I'm not going to make them black to begin with, because obviously that doesn't look like a real traffic light. Most traffic lights you can see, although we know that red's at the top, we can see that it's red even when it's off because it's kind of dark red, isn't it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 20, is that the right number of zeros? 20, So remember, HTML color codes are 3 pairs of digits, the amount of red, the amount of green, and the amount of blue. So that's a small amount of red, and no green, and no blue. And I'm just going to use the name red for when it's on, so that's off and on. And similarly for amber, I'm going to go, let's go for 2020, 0. So that might be difficult. It might be difficult to see sometimes how to make things like yellow by mixing red, green and blue, but what you can do is you can think of complementary colours. So if you look at the colour wheel and see what's opposite, we can make things more yellow by making them less blue, because blue and yellow are opposites. So then there is a colour called orange. I know I used yellow in the first one, but I've since remembered that orange exists. And then green, we can do a similar thing. So green is no red, bit of green, no blue. And then obviously when it's on, it'll be green. So that's my colours. So dark red, dark orange, dark green, light green. How are we going to pick them? So what I'm going to do is n counts from 0 to 2, but actually we've decided to number the lights 1, 2 and 4. So how do we get from 0, 1 and 2 to 1, 2 and 4? Well, 1, 2 and 4 are powers of 2, and they are 2 to the power 0, 2 to the power 1, 2 to the power 2. So it's 2 to the power n gives us the value of the lights. So how you do a power in JavaScript is like this. So math.pow, and it'll be 2 to the power n. So that's how that works. That's 2 to the power n. And I'm just going to, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take whatever the current light would be. So that's lights. That's the current combination of lights current. And I'm going to do a bitwise AND, which is that symbol in JavaScript, with whatever the current power of 2 is, so 1, 2 or 4. And remember from that page we looked at a minute ago, that's going to give me the answer 1, 2 or 4. And I don't really want that, I want 0 or 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide that by the same power again. So if I'm going to do 1 divided by 1, 2 divided by 2, or 4 divided by 4. So I always get the answer 0 or 1. And then I'm going to use that as an index into colour. And colour, well, that's the second part, isn't it? So that gives me the 0 or 1. I also need to see which actual bulb we're talking about, so I need to put the n in there. And then finally, so I've looked up which bit from the array. So the n is whether we go for that, or that. And this bit in here is whether we go for the first or the second one. As I said, if you find that finding that a bit tricky to follow, just go for ifs or some other method. And then so what we need to do then is we want to say bulb n dot style dot background color equals that. So we're setting, as we go around, we've set the bulb to the right color. So notice no ifs there. I've just created a statement that works under every circumstance. If you want to use ifs, that's fine. And then what else do we need to do? Is, well, the last thing we need to do at the end is increment the value of current. So we move on to the next stage in the sequence. So we want to say current equals, and it's going to be current plus 1. But if we just keep adding, eventually we're going to go off the end of the array, aren't we? So we're going to go, it's currently 0, and then we've got 1, 2, 3. When we get to 4, we're going to go off the end of these arrays. We're going to get subscript errors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use modular arithmetic to make sure that it wraps around. So when it gets to 4 divided by 4 is 0. So remember the modular arithmetic gives us the remainder. So we go back to the start of the sequence. And then there's one more thing which we need to do, which is to trigger the next change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use setTimeout, and I'm going to run change. I'm going to run it after, well, how long So we're going to use delay current. And you can see why now I've updated current afterwards. It's because we need to use the right delay for this combination of bulbs. And because current, I've used whole seconds here, sorry, delay, I've used current, I've used seconds here, so 10, 2, etc. I need to multiply that by 1,000 because it takes the value in milliseconds. So I could have just put 10,000, 2,000, 8,000 in my array. So, you know, it's up to you, matter of style. So I think that's probably it. Now at this stage, it looks like it's recursive, doesn't it? Because it looks like we're calling change inside the change function, but we're not really, because what this is doing is really kind of queuing the next occurrence of the change function to happen in, or to start with 10 seconds time, but then it will move on to the next statement and then move on to the end of the function. So actually the function will finish before the kind of queued version runs again. So you might want to be a little bit careful if the function takes longer than the delay, because it will still be running the next time it occurs if you're not careful. Also, if you get the function to call itself again after a second, the occurrences of that function won't be a second apart. They'll be a second plus however long it takes to run the function. So if it takes half a second to run the function and then you delay a second, it'll happen every second and a half. So that's why set interval might be more useful if you want to make something where time is important. Obviously it won't take half a second in this case. JavaScript's pretty fast, but just so that we can just to make that clear, that's why you would use set interval. So if it's a very regular occurrence, then set interval is the way to go. Set timeout's good where we've got a different delay each time, or where we just want a little delay before something happens, like in my binary game when you get the answer right. The other reason I've used set timeout in the binary game rather than set interval is because the interval does change. It speeds up as the game progresses. Right, so we run the startup. Startup reads the state of the lamps, or the lamp objects, into an array, and it triggers change. Change sets the colors, sets the timeout for the next occurrence, updates current, so we move on to the next position in the sequence. Right, hopefully that will work. Let's have a look. So traffic light, refresh. Okay, got a JavaScript error, so that's why I've got my notification on there. Math.power is not a function. It's not wrong. It is actually math.pow. So pow. Let's try that. And let's run that. And there we go. So there's red. It should be for 10 seconds. And then it should move on to the amber light. Or red and amber in the case of UK traffic lights. Briefly. And then to green. Green for 8 seconds. And then it move on to amber. Briefly. And then back to red. And then it will start again. So because we've used modular arithmetic to get current to wrap around, current goes 0, 1, 2. When it gets to 4, uses modular arithmetic, brings it back down to 0, so it keeps going round. So there you go, job done. So what we've looked at in this video is what set timeout does. It effectively introduces a delay, it kind of cues things to happen at some point in the future. It always works on a function. So most of the time you're going to want to write a function with a name and use that, but you can do a kind of inline function. And you need to be a little bit careful as well with using things like, if you just go back to the program. So here, using the value of current, because we're using that, we want to know the current value, that makes sense to update it afterwards. But if you were going to, if change relied on the state of any variables, you might also need to be a little bit careful that those variables didn't change before the function ran again. So if you're passing variables to that, well, you can run into trouble trying to pass variables to a function that you repeatedly call using timeout. So sometimes it needs to be quite carefully crafted. So if you want to pass variables to it, you might be better off popping them in a kind of global array and reading the next value in from the list, or some kind of procedure like that. So just watch out for that. But basically that's how it's used. That's the most common use, to delay something for a period of time. If you just want to do the same thing over and over again with the same time interval, have a look at the next video and see how we use setInterval.